Says Aldrin St. Pierre is following that story already outside court for us this morning. Aldrin, a very good morning to you, and the opposition certainly not letting this one go. Explain to us what they're basing their fight on.
Well, certainly they're making the argument that the corruption charges that have been brought against Jacob Zuma have been brought against him in his personal capacity, not in his capacity as a member or a worker of the state, considering, of course, that the other argument has been that at the time of these alleged corrupt payments that were made to former President Jacob Zuma, he was still an MEC in KwaZulu-Natal, and then, of course, he became the deputy president of the ANC and later the deputy president of the country, and eventually the president of the country as well. The DA is saying that the former president, should foot his own bill, while the EFF is arguing that not only should the former president pay back the money that has been spent so far on the corruption case, as well as considering that there have been 9 cases so far, they're also saying that his lawyer, Michael Halley, must also pay back some of the money that has been paid by the state attorney. The EFF is putting the amount at just above 30 million, while the DA is putting the amount at around 15 million. And the DA's reasoning behind this is based on the response that President Cyril Ramaphosa has given to Parliament. And just take a listen to what Cyril Ramaphosa, the president, had to say about this agreement that the former President Thabo Mbeki as well as former President Jacob Zuma had gone into.
Government has contributed 15.3 million to the personal legal costs of former President Jacob Zuma since 2006. Of this amount, approximately 7.5 million was spent on the period between 2006 and the withdrawal of the charges against the former president in 2009. An amount of 7.8 million has been spent since 2009. This stems from a request by the former president, which he made in 2006, for legal representation at state expense in respect of the criminal proceedings. The request was approved by the presidency based on advice by the State Attorney's Office and the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, as it then was. The former president signed an undertaking to refund the state if he was found to have acted in his personal capacity and own interests in the commission of the offences with which he was charged.
Well, Yuveka, President Cyril Ramaphosa has since written to Parliament, Parliamentary Speaker Baleka Mbete, revising that amount, and that amount now sits at 16.7 million rand, and that still falls short of what the EFF is claiming, which they say that the former president owes the state more than 30 million rand. And I'm running a short snap poll on Twitter asking people, what do they think? Should former President Jacob Zuma's legal bill be paid by the state, continue to be paid by the state, or should the president be paying his own, the former president be paying his own legal fees? And from the results that I've received so far, you have 22% who are saying that, yeah, the state should pay this bill, and you have around 78% who are saying that no, former President Jacob Zuma should pay his own bill. And this is very important because as Masuku is arguing, Masuku is representing former President Jacob Zuma is arguing, is that this case is being used by the opposition, and quite particularly the DA, to campaign for next year's elections. So whatever decision the court comes down to, the DA will be using that decision and will be campaigning ahead of next year's election, saying that we are a opposition party that has been a champion for accountability, and we try to force the former president to pay back all the money that has been paid in his legal fees, but also to ensure that as he continues with this litigation around the corruption charges that he faces, that he must foot his own bill. But the first hurdle, of course, for them will be Paja, whether they've met the requirement that an administrative decision to be set aside must be lodged within 180 80 days, and former President Jacob Zuma's lawyer saying that they have failed to meet that requirement, considering that the DA as far back as 2008 had already asked a parliamentary question with regards to who's footing the bill of former President Jacob Zuma.
All right, well, you've heard from South Africans in your snap poll, Aldrin, but very quickly for us, what's the feeling out there? What are legal experts saying in terms of which way this judgment might go today?
It's one of those. It always depends on who you speak to. Firstly, as I mentioned, that the first hurdle would be whether the court will allow this condemnation, to allow this application, and actually say that this application does meet the merits when it comes to Paja, and based on how serious this matter is, that this matter will be heard. Here's another important thing, though, is not only is this case about Jacob Zuma's own personal fees or the fees that he should be paying back, but it's also about setting precedents that those members of the executive or former members of the executive who are serving in cabinet, who have been accused of issues of corruption relating to state capture, whether they as well will have their legal fees being footed by the state or being footed by you and I, taxpayers. And that is what is at the heart of this matter here in front of this court.
Okay, well, we'll know at some point today. Thank you very much, Aldrin Sampier.